Hello, and welcome to the Legally Uncut podcast by the Trusted Advisors. This is a podcast where law meets real life. Join seasoned lawyers from the Trusted Advisors as we delve into everyday issues, trends, and policies affecting businesses and shaping our conversations while we offer insights from a legal perspective and empower you to better understand the law and its implications on everyday living.
It was a combination of those things. We had to bring in more talent to kind of execute our growth or expansion strategy. And then we had to invest a little bit of effort and resources into our presence, both digitally and offline, for people to be able to identify our business as a service provider in the area that we are choosing to operate. So that's the answer to your first question. What did we do? How did it affect our growth trajectory? I mean, it's extremely crucial. Just like Mr. Taiwo was saying, at the pre-seed stage, is mostly, you can think of it as a proof of concept, right? So the investors, they invest, depending on what kind of fund or what kind of, capital that you brought into your organization, if it's debt or if it's equity, most of the time they extend to you a small facility, and then we agree on certain milestones and say, oh, if you are able to grow to this point within a particular period, then we will consider making a bigger investment into your organization. So in terms of proving the concept and building out the business in the way that you have it in your head, because most of the time when you have an idea, it's a vision, right? You're trying to create a future that doesn't exist today. So you need to be able to say, in the next 12 months, given this little amount of fund that I'm asking to raise right now, called pre-seed funding, I want to be able to go to this point. So without that money, you may still be able to grow, but it will take a whole lot longer than 12 months, for instance. So how it affected our growth trajectory was that we're able to hit our milestones much faster. And it has gotten us to the point where we've also been able to raise some follow-on funding.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Mr. David, right? This question is for you. Now, coming from a company, or rather, as a head of marketing in an organization, in a startup that has also raised funding, I would like to know how did your marketing strategy evolve after securing funding?
Yeah, I haven't really worked in a company where we've raised funds. What we've done with Global was we were part of Techstars, and Techstars is an incubator program. It's like you being it's like internship. So they basically just hold your hand and tell you what to do with your marketing, what to do with your hiring, and all of that. So we didn't really go all out to do exorbitant marketing per se, but they gave us like directions and they gave us partnerships. So we got a couple of things on discounts. So I think that's just one of the things. That's actually one of the questions I wanted to ask Mr. Chair. If he would prefer a direct funding for a startup, or he would prefer an incubator. So like YC them Techstars. That's actually the question I want to ask him after. But for us at Global, and based off of my experience, they just held our hands and then help us with partnerships. We could get email marketing at a discount. We get some certain things at a discount based on the partnership they have with other brands. So I think that is just one thing for us. But if you ask me, and based on what I've seen in the industry so far, you will notice that when people get funding, they go a lot to do some really huge, marketing. They hire influencers, the big names. So a lot of people splash their money when they get funding. So I think it's just a way of getting in, more customers and onboarding more customers and getting new leads. So I think it's necessary if you ask me.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Mr. David. Mr. Taye, I was asking a question before the network went off, and I want to go back to my question. So now my question is on protecting the interest of founders during the entire funding stage. So it's in two parts, right? So I'm just curious, what are the things that founders should look out for in funding agreements? But basically, what are the things founders should look out for in their interaction with investors during pre-funding, during the funding stage, and post-funding?
Okay. So, apologies for my, disconnect. So the for pre-funding, the company is still essentially an ideating, entity, so to speak. You're playing with ideas. It probably works or it probably doesn't, right? At that point, it's important to go for alignment. Investors have appetite for different kinds of projects and in different directions. So you want to select an investor that agrees with the area, you're operating. And because it will be more of investment against future equity, as in the case of SAVE, you should be careful because that would not be the last funding round you will be going through. So the issues of dilution will readily come into mind, right? Because they are vulnerable at that stage. For little money, you find a whole lot of founders giving away so much of equity, and which in the future render them as footnotes when they should be the topic within their company. So there are always, when you're reviewing agreement for this, there are things that your lawyers can always guide you to do. With respect to taking a position, sorry, can I go on?
Yes, please, you can.
Yeah, taking a position to maintain strength in what started or what is starting as their main idea. And things like also the exit journey for your investors. You need to not only understand it, but also be able to communicate it effectively to your investor. So that's the one leg for pre-seed funding. Or is it pre-funding or pre-seed funding?
So pre-funding. Yes,
okay.
Pre-funding.
When funding itself comes into play, like I said, this money came for value, correct? You want to be able to safeguard whatever interest the investors have invested in your business. So we have, the integrity test, your process integrity, your people integrity, your system integrity. These things all have something to do with certain documentation. So the value they saw in your company will oftentimes revolve around these key issues: the people, the products, and your system. So if Pade, for instance, is an HR, solution provider, behind all of this, you have a people segments, you have, a system segment, and you have the product itself, which is what we call Pade in its entirety. Each of these components, you need to prepare sufficient documentation to safeguard them, and also give an assurance to the investors that not only would they get better in the future, there would not be an erosion to whatever they put their money into.
Thank you so much, Mr. Taye. I mean, that was well. I have a follow-up question from that. Right, you had talked about safeguarding the interests of these startups, basically safeguarding their solutions and their products itself. So now, my question is, what steps should they take to actually protect this interest? I'm guessing that this interest is could be their intellectual property, could be the brand itself, a product within the brand. So what are the steps that these startup founders should take in trying to protect these intellectual properties and assets?
So for tech startup, you say the entirety of their being revolves around their IP. So this IP can take the form of trademarks in their brand. It takes the form of copyright in certain instances, their trade secrets, the key man know-how, and even as much or as far as the source code of whatever tech they have in place. that is built for them. Now, each of these you have different measures to put in place to safeguard them. And it's in safeguarding them that you can actually ensure continuity, right? So I'll give the example of trademark. Pade, I'm sure it's registered as a trademark, right? Same with Glover, I want to assume. But assuming you've built all this while, you go to the market with Pade and you fail to, beautiful name, by the way, but it has, I used to call it Pade. You know, I think Chiamaka corrected me. To be honest, you could have gone to the market with this without all those protection, and then you find out down the line that somebody has registered that name. We're currently dealing with something similar, where a company has built a legacy of over 60 years, and somebody registered a similar name. There's no doubt that no matter your marketing experience, no matter your influencer engagement and all of that, while you are building for yourself, you are indirectly building for that other person. And they will be investing, you know, your IP right in a way. And God help you if they venture into similar business as the one you're getting into. And when you consider the cost of registering these things, you wonder why certain, believe it or not, a whole lot of founders don't take those steps before building. And then you build down the line, and then you realize that you missed, you know, that. The other one I want to touch on, which I feel really deals very much with tech startup, is your key man, right? A whole lot of startups hire their CTOs, right? And they say, oh, you are the CTO, and there is no measure in place to safeguard, either to ensure that that person stays on the job, right? Or if they want to leave, there are certain limitation on how they can transfer whatever they've garnered within your system onto another, you know, competitor, so to speak. There's a fine line between in dealing with this, because there's a restraint of trade discussion on it, and there is also the survival and continuity debate for your business. But that, for me, if you take trademark out, that key man risk component of it is equally important, because that person can take the substance of your business away and just plug it to your next competitor. Now, you will find that most founder, CEO, double as CTOs, I don't know what the cases are in your respective companies. In such cases, maybe you have limitation or those risks are edged to an extent. But where you have dedicated CTOs and there's no legal framework, so to speak, to ensure that not only can they not just leave on a whim, but even if they leave, there's a limitation on how they can just port your IP onto the next person. So these two components are the areas I will want to talk about. This also dovetails into what we've spoken about, which is trade secret. Trade secret will almost invariably also sit mostly with people in marketing and the executive guys, right? There are measures you can put in place to ensure that these things are kept intact. And by extension, at least you're giving some security, level of security and assurance to the people who have placed the bets on your organization. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Seye. That was quite insightful. So, Mr. Seye, we've heard your fundraising journey. We've heard the challenges that you faced. We've also heard from you on approaching potential investors and trying to look out for potential investors. We've also spoken to us on growth post funding. So now, 70% of our audience right now are all startup founders who are very eager. I mean, that is always the major thing in startup founders' mind. How do I secure funding? So we have people on the call who are very, very eager to get funding. what advice would you give to them, to these founders who are about to embark on their fundraising journey, based off from your experience?
I would say they should be more concerned with finding customers, right? If you start your business with the motivation that, oh, at some point I'm going to raise funding, it's usually sets you off on a sort of a wrong path. Your number one priority when you start your business is, how do I turn this into an actual business? How can I find a certain number of people or businesses who are going to pay money to use the products that I've built? Now, this version of your business can be very scrappy. It can be, in tech, we call it your MVP, your most viable product, right? Minimum viable product, I apologize. Minimum viable product, which is, what's the scrappiest form of your product that you can build with whatever resources are available to you, and then take that to market. You collect, first of all, revenue, and then you collect feedback, and then there are certain nuances that you will get from your feedback that you can rebuild into your product to make it more sustainable. That should be your first priority. And then you need to make it repeatable. You need to make that revenue repeatable, not just somebody pays you and then never pays you again. Before you now concern yourself with oh, okay, I'm going to go out and look for funding. Now, funding, before in tech again, before you get to pre-seed funding and going to talk to actual institutional investors and stuff, you can do a friends and family round, right? You can talk to people within your circle to say, hey, I'm building something. In my case, it was $10,000. I spoke to two people who, after we had built a decent enough version of our product, and we had clients who were paying us on a yearly basis. The first people I ever spoke to were not like VCs or institutional VCs or big investors, so to speak. It was just two of my friends who I said, hey, do you want to invest in the next Paystack? And they were like, yeah, let's look at it. I showed them what the product was. I showed them what our customers were paying us and how our customers were using our products. And they were like, oh, Seye, I'm happy to support your journey. You need to be able to find those people who will help you get to the next level, right? Where you can now start talking to bigger investors to say, okay, we're going to make this into a $100 million business or a $500 million business or a unicorn, as most people attempt to build. So yeah, that would be my advice to people who are building something. If you already have passed that stage and you already have an MVP and you have businesses or customers using your products, then my advice on the next steps for you will be to start investing in social capital that will put you in front of the kind of investors that would support or back your business. You need to appear in the right circles, have conversations with people related to the industry that you're operating in. Also increase your visibility, talk about your products, all right? As you should be the number one evangelist of your product. I talk about my product every day on Twitter, no matter what stage I get.
I follow you on Twitter, so I can attest to that.
Thank you. So talk about your journey, speak to people. You would the person who helped me solve the funding problem largely for us was somebody who we went to school together 20 years ago. I reconnected with him via this same Twitter, and he called me to his office. We sat down and he connected me with people who funded about 90% of our funding round. So yeah, that's my advice. Also, answer something that Mr. Taye mentioned. One of the ways to mitigate against that key man risk is that in most cases, in the very early stages of your business, it's probably going to be very difficult for you to hire a CTO. In my business, my co-founder Lekon and I own the business outright, right? We have equal ownership in the business, so there's no sort of key man risk, right? Everybody's interest is in how to turn the business into something bigger. So, in fact, again, to answer David's question, I think, who said something about accelerators and just people who invest in your business directly. Many of the accelerators today will not accept you into their program if you don't have a technical co-founder, somebody who can actually build the product. Because in the early days, it's not realistic for you to pay somebody to build it, right? You have to have somebody who is willing to build it with you to the point where you can now gain enough resources to build the product out properly. Yeah, so that's a way to mitigate it for most people in tech.
Thank you so much, Mr. Seye. My next question is for Mr. David, and it's based on from what Mr. Seye said. He talked about customer acquisition and how important it is. I mean, that should be the focus of a startup at the early stage, and not just getting funding. So, Mr. David, what customer acquisition strategies have worked best for you, based on your experience? What customer acquisition strategies have worked best for you?
I think for me, before I even start, trying to acquire customers, what I always try to do first is to understand the target audience. Who actually needs this product? Who is the person I'm marketing to? That would determine how to acquire the customer. So, for example, a product like crypto, we know it was going to definitely be the young people that would understand it. So, something like a campus storm was easy. Something like a campus storm came up, and we said, okay, fine, that would be something to do. Something like sponsoring student-based activities is something to do because we know we can easily acquire customers in that area. So when it comes to customer acquisition, you need to understand the target audience first. Who am I selling this product to? Who exactly is that one person? If it was just one person I'm supposed to target, who would that one person be? Once you find out who that one person is, you can easily find out where that one person eats, sleeps, how he thinks, what he does for a living. You can tailor down everything. You can profile that one person, and then it'll be easy for you to acquire that customer because without knowing who you are selling to, it'll be very difficult for you to, acquire customers. And what I see brands do these days is just do marketing based on one size fits all. So they just do one kind of marketing, expecting that one type of marketing to bring in the customers they need. But for me, I tend to tailor marketing based on the products. So, for example, if you work for a company that has different product verticals, it will be hard for me to just do one ad and say, okay, this one ad or this one campaign would acquire all the customers I need. I like to tailor my campaign based on the product. So at Global here, we have a product called airtime to cash, where you can convert your excess airtime into cash. Typically, a worker in the office, a 9 to 5 person, would not use that product because they need airtime, they're making calls, they are business people. But a student in school, which is relatively hungry, has parents, depending on their parents, we definitely have access airtime, maybe from friends or family that want to convert that airtime to cash. So my marketing would not be one ad that I'm putting on DSTV, believing that it would convert that customer that is free. No, I need to tailor that ad based off of the product because I know the customer I'm trying to acquire. So that's what I always do, and that's what I advise anybody to do. Understand who you are selling the product to first, and then you tailor the marketing to that person. It will be easy for you to acquire that customer.
Thank you so much, Mr. David. So I still have a follow-up question for you. How do you measure the success of your marketing campaigns?
It depends on the objective. To be honest, it depends on the objective. For example, I would say at the beginning of this year, we ran an awareness campaign, and then we looked at the metrics. For example, we have Facebook Insights, we have Google Analytics, and all those tracking tools. You can actually just see the spike when it goes up and when it comes down. Those numbers don't lie, and I always depend on that kind of data because at the end of the day, you need to be able to defend your spending. They give you a budget of say 20 million, 30 million for a quarter, and you splash on different things. At the end of the day, they'll ask you what it is that you did. So you need to be able to defend those numbers, and I always depend on that kind of data. So it depends on the objective of the campaign. If it was a conversion-based campaign, you look at how many sign-ups you had. That's what will determine your success. If it was an awareness-based campaign, you look at the numbers of maybe new followers you've had on your different social media platforms, your open rate on your email campaigns, and all of those things. So it differs. So it depends on the objective of the campaign. That's how you can measure if it's a success or not.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. David. Mr. Taye, so we're drawing close to the end of the webinar. I have one last question for Mr. Taye. So now my question actually has to do with compliance. I mean, compliance is a major issue for startups in Nigeria, especially with the lot of a lot of regulations trying to regulate this sector, this the Nigerian startup ecosystem. So now, how can startups stay compliant as they grow and expand? What are the steps that startups should take in order to stay compliant as they grow and expand?
Okay, so if we are to segment this, thank you very much. If we are to segment this, the basics will be what we've spoken about. The basic regulation, the starting point will be that you can't do business in Nigeria without registering with the CAC, right? There's a whole lot of benefits to that, but it's the first step in compliance, right? We also speak about, that to existence in the first instance. But if you flip the page from that, you have, post-establishment, then operational compliances that you need to. It depends on the sector that you play in. The tech startups generally will come under the ambit of what you call the FCCPC, the NDPB, Nigerian Data Protection Bureau. Those come standard for all startup. For the FCCPC, it's becoming a reality now that you can't even have your app hosted on Google or Apple, iStore, if you're not registered with the FCCPC. So right from the beginning of your journey, you are required to make sure you do basic data protection, put data protection compliance measures in place to also have the FCCPC, registration done. That is generic. For the guys in the financial sector, you have the, opt game to comply with the applicable CBN, guidelines and regulations. You have tons of them: governing payments, governing lending, governing banking, governing, the PSSP, the PTSA, the PTSP. What's important for you is to know that these things are going to apply in stages, right? You won't be required to do all your compliance or carry out all your compliance journey and complete them right from the beginning of your setting out. Then there is also the fundraising aspect, which is the main topic we're talking about today. The SEC also has tons of regulatory framework. For instance, I'm happy for the paid guys that they're able to do bootstrapping up until they did their, fundraise. But you find a few others going for crowdfunding at early part of their journey. This is something that is strictly regulated by the SEC. If you also find yourself with the angel investors, you will need to, also, observe certain compliance with the SEC. So the garment of compliance is a very wide one, but we will always encourage startups to understand what is necessary for them per time. And also, one of the things we also try to do for startups within our own, ecosystem is to ensure that some of these things are written down as regulations, but compliance can be a different ballgame entirely. So what we do is to make engagement with regulators. When you maintain the kind of relationship we do with regulators, it's easy to get the first row seats understanding of what the regulations are saying and how you can go, survive, and thrive, making the best and taking the best advantage of the prevailing regulatory framework. Like Mr. Bandele had said, it will be difficult for a struggling or a crawling, startup to carry the burden of the expenses. He said, that comes with hiring a CTO, but I would tweak that and say even some of these regulatory requirements may be difficult for you, to pretty much carry the burden up front. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
To carry the burden at this stage. Sorry, I have some calls coming in. So apologies.
That's fine, sir.
So,
thank you so much, Mr. Taye. I mean, it's been quite an interesting discourse so far. We've gained value from three major perspectives in this fundraising journey. We've gained insights from the startup founder, from the legal and regulatory parts, and also from the marketing and branding strategists. So right now, I know there are a lot of questions, right? We have a lot of questions for Mr. Seye, Mr. Taye, and Mr. David. So this is time. So kindly drop your questions in the comment box. I know that Mr. David also has a question for Mr. Taye. So Mr. David, you can ask your question.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. So, over the years, like in the last year, we've seen a lot of startups have issues and they end up, shutting down. And this has kind of like led to VCs asking for a lot in their, in your data room. So I don't know if how this has affected you as a from a legal perspective, trying to prepare like a data room for investors to look at that. I'm just asking how this has affected, everything in general.
So your question is, how has the apathy sort of impacted, or the increased request for information affected us in setting up
Increased request, yes, increased request, because that's actually what we are experiencing at this point, because we're about to raise.
It's a paradox, okay, and it's part of what we've been talking about. So you have a startup whose mindset is predominantly get down to business, right? If they can, good one. We have, we're in company of very diligent startup founders and executives, but a good number that we've interacted with want to do away with due diligence, right? If they can go to market without a single sheet of paper being signed, they will, right? So you often find most startups not ready, right? So the challenge we are faced in that sphere is to ask the client to pause and ensure that certain things are in place. In any event, if you are with us, there is no chance that we won't insist. Part of what we insist, for people we have listed is that certain things need to be in place. The documents they're asking for, they are pretty standard. And I can tell you, outside of tech, ecosystem, these things will be given, right? But because of the fast pace and the lean nature of the tech ecosystem and the players there, you find most of these documents are not available. But what we do is to put a pause and ensure that these documents are quickly put in place. Does that pretty much answer your question?
Yes, it does, yes.
Because if it's a business, right, then there is a room to provide almost everything that you have in place. And again, most of their conversations will always center around customers, the numbers you have. So some of them we may not be able to assist with. It may require other, experts, to come on board. But these are areas that we have people that we've worked with and we are able to bring them on board.
Thank you so much, Mr. Taye. We also have a question from Israel. So, Mr. Israel, kindly unmute your mic and ask your question. Okay, while we wait for Mr. Israel to unmute his mic and ask his question, there's also a question on the chat box. The question says, how do you educate and nurture inexperienced startups to pivot to investment grade? Furthermore, are there any hubs to stimulate and share resources growth? So I'm guessing this question is for Mr. Seye.
Hi. Yeah. It says, how do you educate and nurture inexperienced startups to pivot to investment grade? Furthermore, are there any hubs to stimulate and share resources with? First of all, yes, there are a lot of hubs. So one advice I want to give most startup founders, if you said there are many of them on the call, is that the startup landscape in Africa has changed, right? And we need to, the earlier we understand it, the better it is for the ecosystem in general. Just like Mr. Taye was saying, somebody was talking about, David was talking about requests for information, blah, blah, and some other things. I encourage you to share as much information as possible with somebody who is looking to invest in your startup. Guess what? If they say no, it's not the end of the world. In fact, from the no's, and it's provided that you are pitching to a good enough person to give you feedback about why they will not be investing in your organization, it's actually a good thing for you, right? There may be some things that you are already doing wrong, and if you don't share that information, if you somehow scale through that particular funding process, that problem is still going to come back in the future. So, provided you are pitching to a reputable investor, I advise that once you put your data room together and give them access to it, let it be controlled. Ensure that they also don't go around sharing that information with other people, because yes, I understand the privacy of your information and you don't want to get it in front of unnecessary people, but please be open with information as much as you can. At the end of the day, from that experience, you will learn how to position yourselves better towards future funding rounds. Back to the advice I was talking about. So the investment or startup landscape or tech ecosystem in Africa has changed. Things that happened prior to 2020, at that time, there were a lot of Western investors, investors who came from America and Europe, who were trying to kind of like do the Africa rush and grab as much of the valuable companies on the continent as possible, and they were just throwing money at the problem. But since the turn of the pandemic, right, even though there were other things that happened that made the ecosystem mature a little bit more, now the investors who are active on the continent are actually value-driven investors. So they are looking for real-life businesses that they can use their investment to accelerate to become something big. So it's better for us startups now to know that, let me get my ducks in a row and put all my information properly, have my legal practice and financial due diligence and all of those things properly done, so that when you meet an institutional investor who is serious about investing, they already know that, okay, this is the kind of person I want to invest in, and then the funding process goes a little bit easier. So don't be worried about sharing information. Lastly, to answer the first part of this question, how do you educate and nurture inexperienced startups to pivot to investment grade? First of all, apart from doing research and giving yourself the responsibility of gathering enough information that lets you sort of operate in the way that is acceptable for a startup that becomes investable, I think you should also talk to people who have done it before and say, what was your experience? You have to be like a sponge and soak up as much information as you can from your immediate environment and say, this is how I do this thing at my startup. Is this a good way to do it? Is this going to come back and bite me in the future? How would you do XYZ? What are the things that I need to know? For instance, for us, one of the key things that we needed to know when we decided to start raising funds was we had to figure out our unit economics. From the previous time in Africa, which I spoke about, when e-commerce and fintech was the order of the day, most people didn't pay attention to their unit economics, and everybody was looking for acquisition to the point of critical mass, and then you now monetize. That's what happened to guys like Jumia, Konga, all the guys who wanted to say, oh, we have millions of users, even though we're not making a lot of money on each one today. By the time we get to a particular critical mass and we monetize that platform via traffic or whatever, we will become profitable. The dynamics of Africa doesn't really support that type of business model. And for us now, who are doing startups now, you have to figure out your unit economics from day one. You have to be able to say, if I have 10 customers, right, this is how much I will make from each customer after spending the amount of money that I need to spend to be able to service that customer successfully. Now, whatever that economics are, whatever that profit is per customer, you now need to be able to multiply it by 100,000, 1 million, or whatever number of customers you are trying to acquire in that market. So yeah, you need to be able to leverage on available knowledge in your industry, so that it helps you kind of, I don't know if pivot is the word, just prepare for a time where you become more investable.
Thank you so much, Mr. Seye. I hope that answers your question, Solomon. Cool. Yes, Mr. Israel, you said you have a question for Mr. Taye.
Yes, I do. I must first appreciate the organizers of this event. As a person, I must confess I've gained a lot of insight from what our speakers have said. So, as I said, my question is for Mr. Taye. While speaking, Mr. Taye mentioned the necessity of internal due diligence, and he also spoke about restraint of trade. So my question: to what extent does restraint of trade assure investors to invest in startups? To what extent does that clause assure investors to invest in a startup?
Sorry, can you repeat the question? I didn't quite. I said. Yes. Please, can you repeat the question?
Israel, your volume is quite low, so you may probably want to type that in the chat box. We can barely hear your question.
A call was coming in. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yes. So what I was saying was that initially while Mr. Taye was speaking, he spoke about internal due diligence, the necessity of internal due diligence. And then I captured something on restraint of trade. So my question is, to what extent can inserting a restraint of trade clause in, let's say, a contract assure investors to invest in a startup? To what extent can inserting that clause in a contract assure investors to invest in a startup business?
Mr. Taye, did you get the question?
No, I still didn't. But if I can just speak broadly about, is it about due diligence? I think that's the part I heard.
Yes, internal due diligence and restraint of trade.
Restraint of trade.
Yes. To what extent does it assure investors to invest in startups?
No, it depends on your pitch, really. So we've all gone around and we have consensus that, at the end of the day, it's about the value you bring, right? It's about the number of customers that are going to buy what you're offering and how much you are going to be making, right? Ultimately. And after that, talk about values and that align, right? So if you followed quite closely, I built that logic around the important role of a CTO, right? If your CTO is central to, or the technical component of what you do, as is the case with most tech startups, if it's central to what you do, the departure of a CTO can actually spell a whole lot for a tech startup. Now, answering your question, if you're able to assure, it's about business continuity, right? And call it a measure of disaster recovery measures being in place that come what may. What attracted you to our business in terms of our value offering will remain come hell or high water, right? So that is the angle where it assures the investors that what they are putting their money, at least will stand the test of either in perpetuity or up to the period when they are bound to exit. And so by extension, you are assuring them that their money is saved and whatever return they anticipate will either be met or pass. Does that, answer the question?
Yes, it does.
Very well,
I
very
believe it
well,
does.
very well. Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. It's been quite an insightful conversation. I see Mr. Francis Oni's hand is raised up. I don't know if you have a question. Okay, so I guess there's no question. This brings us to the end of our webinar. It was supposed to be a 1-hour webinar and taking an additional 12 minutes, but it's been quite we've gained a lot of knowledge and we've gotten a lot of value from this entire discussion. I have. We'd also want to thank Mr. Seye Bandele, Mr. David Seye, and Mr. Taye Awofiranye for giving us, time is money, time is value, for giving us 1 hour out of your very busy schedule to be able to have this webinar for people. If you have further questions.
Yeah, I think Francis is ready to ask his question now.
Oh, okay, Mr. Francis. You're muted. Okay, so please, Mr. Francis, you can follow. Well, you can send this. You can send your follow-up questions to us. Details are in the chat box already. Also, Mr. Seye Bandele is very active on Twitter, and I'm sure you'll be very happy to answer questions, as well as Mr. David Seye. But it's been quite an insightful webinar. Personally, I've gained quite a lot, and I will be reaching out to Mr. Seye to ask further questions myself. But thank you so much. I want to thank the speakers. I want to thank the people who were with us from the beginning of this webinar till the end, and we appreciate you giving us this time to actually listen to what we have to say.
Hit the subscribe button and turn on post notifications to get notified when the next episode of the Legally Uncut podcast goes online. And you can also keep up with the Trusted Advisors on Instagram at The Trusted Advisors, on Twitter at TTA_law, and on LinkedIn at The Trusted Advisors. Thank you.